Hello, my dear fellow evil crewmates, Carl here, and welcome to my OP15 Blackbeard deck building guide. There's a lot of questions to be answered. What tech do we want to include? Do we want to play Burgess and blockers, or do we want to play the KO engine? And the answers to all of that and more shall be answered in this video. Let's start with the table of contents, because that's how long this video is. I'm going to start with the introduction, which is now. I will continue into the first two parts of our core, being the searchers and 2Ks, continue to the second part of our core, 3 and 4, namely the raw power cards and the strongest individual cards, then the blockers and the KO engine, and then we're going to continue on to space in the list, what we have after the core. We're going to look at some tech, split up into Blackbeard Pirates type deck, non-Blackbeard Pirates type deck, and 2Ks. Then I'm going to move on to some cards that are just bad and also bad ideas to look out for when you are considering if somebody's deck list is good. Then the BnB decklist that we're going to use and the strength of it. The KO engine decklist that we're going to use and the strength of that. Then which type of metas require which list, so KO engine or BnB. And then we're going to look at the current meta and compare and decide which of the two variants we're going to go with. And lastly, conclusion. So let's get started with the core one, the searchers. So full lead is the core of the deck. If you get this in your starting hand, you're going to keep your starting hand. It lets us find all our cards on curve without needing to spend Dawn on that turn to find something for that turn. It lets us fill the trash for Burgess by adding an extra card every turn. It lets us drop Kuzan targets that we need in the trash so that we can grab something. And it also finds key cards late game when we don't have the time or Dawn to actually find the cards we need and still be able to play them, like if we want to play 10 cost each. Then we have Lafitte. He's our second best searcher. He can give us card advantage. He's generally just very nice. He looks at 5 cards and he cannot whiff, basically. It is statistically almost impossible to whiff a Lafitte search, and he can find good follow-up to himself. And it can also search itself, which means that you have an even lower chance to whiff and higher ability to chain Lafitte's into Lafitte's. And it also means that if you get 2 Lafitte's out in one turn because you found him with himself, it's possible that your opponent can only clear 1, and then this one of the Lafitte's will be able to activate a second time, leading to a +1, plus the swings that it ate, which will either be leader swings, which is nice to save cards on, or often enemy 1 costs, which is unfortunate, but it still allows us to actually get rid of 1 cost, which can be a problem later on if our opponent decides to attach Dawn to them. Lastly, we have My Age. I generally say it's worse than the others, but it's still good, and it has some advantages. So first of all, it's a big spike in the trash. One My Era adds 3 cards to your trash while keeping the same hand size, and so it helps us get Burgess bigger quicker early on, and late game it can help us buff multiple Burgesses at once if we're really trying to go for game. And it can also happen as a trigger, which is great for finding 2Ks if we're desperately trying to survive as somebody's going to game, or early on help us fill the trash, help us find the cards we need. All 3 of them are really useful and really strong, and all of them will be by default a 4 of. The next part of our core are the 2Ks, so we're going to start with Stronger. Stronger is a searchable 2K, and it is also usable as a cost reduction card to get important enemy things into range of your KO things like Black Hole, Finger Pistol, 7 cost Teach, Doc Q. So if you have no other option, it's able to flexibly be thrown in there. And technically it also fills the trash. If it helps you get an extra interval with Burgess, that can be worth it later if you have 2 Burgesses on the field or more and are trying to go for game. Then we have the Caribou, who is unfortunately not a Blackbeard Pirates type card, but is still an amazing 2K. He's a 2K, but also a 1 cost blocker. The on play means he can basically only be played by us, and being able to drop this 1 cost uh, either early on, but also just if we have extra Dawn here or there, allows us to have a blocker that can potentially not be removed efficiently by your opponent, because maybe they rely on plays, maybe they don't have anything innately, and that way it ends up protecting us alive, protecting us a Burgess, or even a 12k Teach. All those scenarios, he's amazing. These will be our standard 2Ks for now and for quite a while, and you should default towards them. The third part of our core are the cards of raw power. So first we have the Burgess. He is a win condition of ours and a very strong card by itself. We quickly bring him to a size where he's no longer just a free easy swing, right? When he comes out, he's 5 or 6, but pretty quickly he goes to 7, and suddenly your opponent can't really swing into him with leader swings anymore, and even 5 and 6 costs will have a difficult time. And then once he gets to 8, 9, it starts requiring a lot of investment if your opponent wants to kill him, and is either going to be just laying there ignored, or will require your opponent to use removal or attack reduction or other sorts of methods like freezing to be able to deal with him. He escalates into a monster that is very, very difficult to counter out of, um, especially because you can have multiple for relatively little cost. Having multiple also means you can go for sudden finishes where unexpectedly you can swing for, let's say, 11,000 3 or 4 times, which is something that very few decks can do so consistently. Even if we're playing a removal KO engine based deck, we eventually will pivot to at least a couple of Burgesses, where we use the engine to stabilize the board early and buy ourselves time, and then use Burgess, drop him when he's already very big, and use that to go for game in combination with the 10 cost. Ideally, we want to play him via Kuzan. The 5 cost Kuzan allows us to play this and draw a card. It is very smooth and it's just always a nice aspect. The 6 cost Kuzan also works. Even though he comes out rested, the Burgess big stat line means he probably survives, and we can chain a 6 cost into a 5 cost into the 4 cost Burgess here. Then we have the 10 cost Teach, the OG. He is another one of our win conditions. Arguably, these are the two, and a very strong card individually as well. He is our late game plan in general as an idea to have, but against some matchups specifically, this is what we're building towards. He stabilizes the board very strongly. He prevents 2 swings on the next turn by stunning one and then blocking the other, and he will probably not die because of his massive stat line. He is also amazing against defensive leader abilities just because of the value we get from that. There's minor things like maybe stunning ace so he can't draw, but there's much bigger things like stunning purple Doflamingo so he can't redirect attacks, stunning red yellow Bonnie and suddenly she's a 5k leader, same with the blue yellow Nami. These are extremely powerful negates, and the Teach can help us stabilize. And if you chain 10 cost Teaches, there's very few cards and decks that will have a higher value back-to-back play on the 10 Dawn turns. And since it protects our board the turn we play it, we can swing in that turn with our other stuff like the Burgesses, and it also adds a 12k body, which means that we probably don't die that turn, and then when it bounces back to us, we now have an additional 12k body and can probably go for game. And that is how a lot of our games go as a general plan, right? Next up, some of the other strongest cards. First, the Kuzan. The 5 cost Kuzan is absolutely crucial for this deck. It adds draw. That's the first thing, that's the main thing. It lets us play our normal cards like Burgess, Augur, or blockers just as normal, except we also get a card. And that card draw is so important to maintain our hand size. Late game, if we get down to 0 cards in hand, then technically we couldn't play anything if we want to add lead ability. And Kuzan is the one card that allows us to play something and still be able to use leader ability. He also gives us flexibility. We can choose what we want to go into, and we can put important cards into the trash, use with stage or leader ability, without worrying that we're never going to see them again, because we know if I need this Devon, if I need this Augur, I can always get him back with Kuzan. He's also a free swing, so if you wait a turn and don't immediately activate him, you can swing with him as a 5k and then activate it, and now you don't have a rested body anymore. So if you have the time and you don't need to grab the Burgess, the Augur right away, it's a nice smooth extra advantage. And lastly, he can delay removal. Because he is completely unremovable from the field, unlike Burgess, which is only immune to KOs, you can always drop this. And if you're suspecting that your opponent may have removal for something like a Burgess, you can leave it at Kuzan for one turn, and then the next turn, when you turn it into Burgess, you're also playing other stuff, so that your opponent has to choose what they want to remove. And then the second card here is going to be Black Hole. Black Hole is an amazing removal tool and also a game finishing tool. We have searchable removal here. Forecast covers quite a lot of things, and being able to search a removal for an important forecast is very, very good. It ignores all protection that cards have inbuilt, whether it's just can't be KO'd or something like this card just can't be removed from the field by your opponent's effects. And it also ignores the protection of KO effects that are kind of a protection in itself. And so it can do things like kill the forecast Marco without giving your opponent card draw. It can shoot the forecast Kikunojo without giving back a life. It can shoot the forecast Dr. Hogback without letting him grab another body. In combination with cost reduction, it can shoot things like the 6 cost Kuma or even the 7 cost Robin, and lets us dodge those very powerful on KO effects. Later on, it also removes blocker. So, unlike Ground Death, which can only negate 5 costs and below, Black Hole can negate anything and then shoots it if it's a 4 cost. And that means you can use it to negate effects of higher cost things even without being able to shoot them. And that becomes relevant when you're trying to go for game later and need to get rid of blocker on some things. So for an easy example, you have the 10 cost Whitebeard, very strong blocker and very difficult to get by. But if we're going for game, we can use one to get rid of the blocker aspect. And even if we don't kill it, it doesn't matter if our opponent is dead, right? We can use 2 of these, and they're searchable in the last turns using stage, and even get rid of 2 blockers to very quickly turn a difficult to end game into a guaranteed finish. Lastly, it's a forecast as something to shoot, not by base value, and that means with relatively little cost reduction, we can shoot relatively big things. One Augur or Tempest Kick, and we can shoot 7 costs, and add a second one, and we can shoot 10 costs. So even though mostly the advantage is the ability to ignore enemy effects, we can also just use it as raw removal as an individual card. We get to the 5th part of the core, the blockers. So we're going to start with Shiryu. Shiryu is just a blocker, but also includes removal. He is a nice Kuzan target, being a 4 cost, and on the board, however, he's an 8 cost, and being an 8 cost dodges basically any cost-based removal, at least anything that would be worth using on a 5k blocker. It dodges Gravity Blade, which is kind of the relevant thing to look at here, and that's kind of the main thing for the cost. It is also just very good against aggro decks and aggro matchups. The ability to prevent one swing and then shoot another body, which potentially would have also had a swing, slows down enemy decks a lot, especially since they often still have 4 costs even as more aggressive decks. And even against decks that aren't as aggro focused, 4 cost hits a lot of good value stuff. There's a lot of strong 4 costs. Think of the current 4 cost Cavendish, a lot of things with 6k bodies that we get to remove and not have to deal with later. So Shiryu there works as a removal that also prevents a swing. And that's just very smooth and useful for a control deck like ours. Next up, we have the Devon. So Devon is both a blocker and an offensive cheese potential tool. She is 6k, which means she can get free blocks in versus leader swings or other weaker swings from characters, letting us save counter in hand, right? Then we also have Banish as a potential, which can be nice if we're up against yellow and maybe they have a guaranteed trigger coming up. But even against yellow, double attack is usually what you want to be going for. If you're trying to swing with her, it can suddenly end the game. Situations that otherwise would be just literally impossible to finish on, Devon can make them winnable. And she can even do it very easily or in a very likely manner, because you can attach Dawn and basically get double the Dawn value out of your attaching, because she does 2 damage with that attached Dawn, so you get the 13k swing or something through, however much you need it to be. And then the Burgesses, the Teaches, can finish the leftover. And if somehow your opponent manages to absolutely drop their entire hand to prevent the Devon swing, now you can probably get a bunch of cheaper swings through and finish anyways. Last but not least, Kuzan, the 6 cost. He is generally a blocker and a Burgess, so kind of like how Shiryu is a block and a removal, Kuzan is block and a Burgess, with even more as the kind of potential upside. If he just dies, he comes back as a Burgess. Great for just a better way to develop your Burgesses while staying alive. But he can also grab the 5 cost Kuzan, since his ability is not name restricted but just cost restricted. And even though arrested Kuzan is an easy target, if you block with him towards the end, you can keep the Kuzan alive and then use it to get a free swing, an extra card, and still get a Burgess. You can also grab Devon above as a sudden end. If you have a double attacker on the board, like playing Devon just with Kuzan before, or just naturally, your opponent will be ready for that, right? He's expecting, he's preparing a blocker, yada yada. Your opponent's counting your swings when they're attacking. Can I afford to swing with this blocker? And then Kuzan grabs the Devon, and suddenly things change. Suddenly they can die, right? Maybe now they only have 1 blocker, Black Hole, 6 Dawn to Devon. Suddenly your opponent's at 0 life and dies to Burgess. It's a nice cheese that's important to keep in mind. Just generally, great value card, and is going to be our best play a lot of the time for the 6, 7, 8, and 9 Dawn turns. However, one downside that he is susceptible to removal, especially if it doesn't KO him. Attack-based effects hit him very easily, because despite being a 6 cost card, he only has 6000 attack, and that's where a lot of the attack-based removal hits. He gets hit by a barrier pistol, which is brutal, and he also gets rested by Mamaragadan after only minus 1000. If he was a 7000, he wouldn't have to worry about those and would be even nicer. But he's still an amazing card, and depending on the deck list, we're always going to run 2, 3, or 4 of these, depending on what's currently the situation to go with. The 6th and last part of the core, which is only part of the core if you're playing the KO version, is the KO engine itself. We're going to start with Doc Q. Doc Q shoots a 1 cost for free every turn. You do have to rest it, which makes him vulnerable, but there is no cost to it. And so with cost reduction, this can shoot mid-game and even higher game things. And so he's always going to be a threat. He kills his counters, and what I mean by that is normally the way you would get rid of low attack rested cards like this, like Lafitte or Doc, would be with your 1 cost searchers. Weak bodies that you don't really have much use for anymore, but Doc can come in and shoot those first, and now your opponent has to use a leader swing, and maybe you already have a Lafitte or something, so now he can't actually kill both and needs to choose what he wants you to actually keep. He forces swings because you can't really ignore him because of the future threat, but then he replaces itself, so you get a lot of value from playing him, and it's just lovely to use in the right situations. And he remains a vague threat, or even if your opponent doesn't have a 1 cost, doesn't have a 4 cost that they're planning on playing right away, they still know that if they don't kill him now, the dog Q will be on the board for the entirety of the game until they do play something that can be shot. They do play a 1 cost, they do play a 4 cost, and so because of that looming threat, your opponent often just has to swing into it, even if there's no direct target coming up. The second part of the engine, the second main part of the core duo, is Augur. He reduces the cost of something by 3 for resting himself. And obviously, the main, most fast use of that is to combo it with Dock and shoot a 4 cost. 4 cost can be very powerful, so this smooth combo has a lot of strength, especially because we can shoot the 4 cost that was played on 4 Dawn with the 5 cost Augur played on 5. Um, he's harder to kill than Doc. Just 6k is not something you can freely swing into, not something you can remove with effects as well, and so he is a much tankier part of the engine, so the Doc will usually die, but the Augur won't, and then you can replace the Doc. He can be combined with, of course, Doc for just a 4 cost, but with even more cost reduction, you can hit even higher things, right? Then, if there's nothing to shoot, then you can just swing with him. 6k swing isn't too bad. 1 Dawn and it's a 7k swing. It's gonna just annoy your opponent because those 6k swings will hit even 6k leaders, and he can deal with a lot of things even without having something to shoot with. He's playable with Kuzan, which is nice, and even with a delay, because you don't have to activate the Kuzan right away if you don't need the Augur effect right away. You can wait a turn, swing with the 5 cost Kuzan, then turn it into an Augur and get to use both of their strengths in one go. He's also just really awkward to kill. I mentioned that he's harder to kill, but he's also really awkward to kill. Because it's somewhat difficult to kill him, it's one thing, but he draws a card on KO, which means investing a lot of resources into killing him feels kind of bad, especially if you're trying to go for tempo. Um, and so there's that, and what would otherwise be a 7k swing life that would probably go through would just get countered by 2k if you go into Augur, but if you leave him on the board, then your stuff gets shot, and it's just painful to deal with as the opponent. Then, next up, the high end of our KO engine is the 7 cost Teach. He shoots 3 costs every turn instead of 1 cost like Doc. And there are some nice targets for that. 7 is relatively early late game, so it can still be used on stuff that you want to get rid of then. 2 cost blockers, 3 cost stuff like Holly. But you're usually going to be using it with Augur or other cost reduction to hit 5 and 6 costs. And there's a lot of very strong 5 costs. Being able to remove those freely before they get to swing and use their abilities is just fantastic. If you add more cost reduction, you can hit 8 to 9 costs. We saw that most clearly against Blue Purple Luffy in OP11. We're removing our opponent's boss monsters at no cost, and so we're just going to snowball into dominating the game. Similar to Augur, if there's nothing to shoot, an 8k swing is just nice. 8k means that your opponent has to drop 2 cards even if they're a 6k leader. With a bit of Dawn attached, it becomes something that is impossible or very difficult to counter if you're just going live. He's also very difficult to remove. A 7 cost means it dodges all cost-based removal, and 8000 attack also dodges most removal, and would require solid investment to swing into. And even if your opponent manages to remove it, you can handpick yourself a card from the trash. You can grab itself if you just want to play it again. If you need the engine to continue, you can grab a 10 cost since you're in the late game. You can grab a black hole if you're going for game. You can grab a 5 cost Kuzan. If you want to, if you're essential on that card draw, a lot of flexibility there. Nice card for the late game engine. And then lastly, Tempest Kick, kind of the honorary member of the engine. It can work as a replacement cost reduction when you don't have the Augur on board, right? It's a lot cheaper. It doesn't require the 5 Dawn setup, which means you can just kind of smoothly weave it in when you quickly need to get rid of one important thing. Mm, so if your opponent has a 6 cost unremovable Enel, Tempest Kick Black Hole, gone. You have a 4 cost you need to shoot, but you don't have a lot of Dawn left. Tempest Kick Q, gone. And so it's just nice in that sense. Early on, it doesn't reduce cost, but it still draws a card, which means you can just use it to cycle, so it's not a brick forever in your hand. And it also has a nice trigger, being able to shoot 3 costs. Not as nice as something like the finger pistol trigger, but 3 costs still covers 1 cost you might want to be rid of, a lot of 2 cost chump blockers, and also 3 costs that can be scary, like the Holly Dog in Purple Enel. Now we've looked at the core cards. So how much space do we actually have left in the list? So we started with the 12 searchers, then we have the 8 2Ks putting us to 20. We have the 4 Burgesses, the 4 Teaches, 28, 4 5 cost Kuzans, 4 Black Holes, 36, 6 blockers, so 4 of the 6 cost Kuzan, and then 2 of Devon or the Shiryu. That puts us all the way up to 42 cards in the deck that we're kind of roughly starting with as our structure. Then we have 10 cards if we want to add in the engine, Augur, Dock, and then maybe, 2 Tempest Kicks or 2 7 cost Teaches. And if that brings us up to 52 cards, which means we're going to need to cut something. Or if we're playing the BnB, then we just need some more blockers to add, like the Vivi. And that puts us to 46 cards, which means we have some extra space to put stuff in. Now, we have some space and we have some flexibility, so even though the engine is at 52 cards, there are cards we can cut down to make space for other things. So there's less space in the KO engine, obviously. But we can move some of the 4 times things to 3 times. And that we can use to accommodate some extra things, right? Because we have searchers and the Kuzan that brings stuff back from the trash. Even if we have something only once or twice, we'll be able to play it repeatedly even and consistently. Key cards can be reduced to 3. So Burgess, for example, is an important card, but in meta where he isn't as used, 3 may work because even if you want to play him many times, you can grab him back with the Kuzans again and again. Searchers are another example. We have 12, so maybe it's okay to cut down on 1. Cutting down more than 1 is risky, and if you go below 10 searchers, very problematic. The Teach can also be cut to 3, the 10 cost Teach. He's pretty slow, so we have a lot of time to find him, and we're rarely going to play more than 1 or 2. But it depends a bit on the meta and how strong he is in it. We are never going to cut Stage or 5 cost Kuzan even to 3, and cards that we can cut to 2 are the 6 cost Kuzan in bad matchups and maybe Black Hole when there's just very few targets. But otherwise, the things I listed for 4, you can cut them down to 3 maybe if you really need more space. If you cut beyond that, any cards of the core down to below 3, you're giving up heavy losses. The searchers, the Kuzans, they're no longer able to compensate for the fact that you only have 2 Burgesses or 2 10 cost Teaches, and you start basically just having an accurately bad list. And so when you're cutting stuff, try to stay at 3 minimum of all the important cards. Now, core aside, let's look at a bit of the tech. First, tech within the Blackbeard Pirates archetype. So, we have Black Vortex. Black Vortex is a lovely 2-cost event that gives us 4k counter and negates the effect of something. This is both a character and a leader, so we can use it to turn off important character effects, and we can use it to turn off important leader effects. Especially being able to do that during their turn can be absolutely insane. Our 10 cost Teach negates leader abilities during our turn, which is nice against defensive leaders, but most leaders use their ability during their own turn. And against leaders that have very powerful effects, Vortex can destroy them. This can either be because they forgot or just did the spacing, the timing awkwardly, and didn't use their lead ability, even though they could have, and swing first with something, and we get to Vortex. Or their leader ability is something that in the right sequencing of events is something they want to use afterwards, and then we can use it to prevent things. So there's also just a lot of effects that we can negate like this. Think of the green Zoro leader that we're able to prevent from restanding and also simultaneously put down for the entire turn. There's also just game-ending effects that we can prevent. The 9-cost Zoro that attacks 3 times. Roger as well, the 10-cost. If we Vortex it, we can then block again. If we Vortex a Rusher that was played, like Roger, before it swings, it actually loses the Rush, which is of course amazing value. But also the Jupiter that Emu plays, we can reduce it, negating its swing when it comes and removing the plus 2000 aura, which is of course also really strong. While Vortex has potential for strength, it is expensive, requiring us to keep 2 Dawn open, which means we have a lot less. For effects, we also have 10 cost teach turns where we can't use it at all. There's also the problem that a lot of strong leader effects can be used before we ever get the chance to Vortex, or cars like effects that are when attacking, which means they proc before we get the chance to use Vortex. And so it's just awkward. There's some targets that would be nice, like Roger, but it doesn't have a lot of impact versus the leaders that are very strong now. And so there's not really a good space for it. Next up, the Liberation. So Liberation lets us shoot a base cost 6 and a base cost 4 unit if we have 2 or less bodies than our opponent on the board, right? And while shooting a 6 and a 4 cost is a lot of value in one go, the condition is very harsh. Especially if we're removing our opponent's board, having 2 less is something we're trying to avoid. And there's also just not a lot of good targets in the current meta. So an L 6 cost would be lovely to shoot, but it's completely immune. The Lucy is strong, but it's a 7 cost. Yellow has stuff like the Kuma or the Nami, but they all have incredibly strong on KO effects, and we would much rather shoot them with Black Hole. It is strong against something like Calgara, and helps with the tempo there, but it's just not common enough of a deck to include. It's a brick otherwise, not really worth it. Then we have Wolf. Wolf is a blocker that's kind of in a similar category as the blocker Shiryu and the Devon. It just doesn't have a good spot. It's just worse than both of them. If you want the 6k blocker, you just go with Devon because it has much more offensive potential. There's not really a lot of cards that where it matters that he can potentially go above 8 cost, right? And he likes the double attack pressure that the Devon has. OP10 Shiryu is a kind of tempo card that's great against 2 and 3 costs. So similar to the other 4 cost Shiryu, it KOs a low cost body, and even though it can't shoot 4 costs, it does it during our turn, which means that, and we don't have to give this up as a body to shoot it. If there are strong 2 and 3 costs in the meta, this can be great value, even if we would love to just play a Burgess for 4. Shooting something like the purple 3 cost and a Holly dog can be amazing, and that's why he's actually worth considering in this set, is mostly because of that Holly. Very difficult to deal with, hard to shoot with stuff like dog, but Shiryu does it while giving us a body, and being 7,000 during the enemy turn means that it's kind of awkward for your opponent to get rid of. It doesn't do anything anymore. It's just a 5k swing, but you also don't want to just constantly swing at everything. So Shiryu can have value. Last set wasn't really good, no targets, but this set, maybe the dog can make it worth bringing into. Also 2-cost stuff like Girl, or even 1-cost if you need to, make this a fine card to play. Also Kuzan target, which always helps. Lastly, the promo Teach. is a strong card. It's slow, it's a brick, it's a 10 cost teach. Um, but it can be valuable against enemies that have multiple blockers or a strong leader ability. If we manage to use the ability, then against multiple blockers like Ace or Emu or Doflamingo with the leader ability or Nami with the leader ability, this can be a game-winning card. Problem being, it takes a whole turn where we do nothing, and we rarely have the chance, and it's usually just a brick. And in situations where it does help, probably the other 10 cost would do the same. But it does have those scenarios where it just lets us get so much tempo in one turn that we can always finish. And if we're healthy enough to survive the turn that we play it, we probably win. Depending on the meta, if the meta is slow enough with enough enemies that have multiple blockers or leader abilities, I could see this being a one of to replace one of our 10 cost teaches. However, in the current meta with the Enel, the Lucy, it's too slow and doesn't give us enough value to include in our lists. Next for the tech, non-Blackbeard Pirates type cards. So, Ground Death, common question. So, Ground Death looks really insane for Teach in theory, but in practice it just isn't. For 3 Dawn, we can negate an enemy character with a cost of 5 or less during the turn, and somebody may compare it to, you know, Black Hole and just be wondering, hey, isn't this just a cheaper version if we're going for game, right? But it is objectively worse. It can't actually negate the high cost stuff. Even a Black Hole can't kill a 10 cost, it can still negate the effects. It can't shoot anything. So those important things like a dead Marco or a Kikunojo, this has no effect on whatsoever. It's also not searchable, so it makes it more likely that you whiff searches and you can't reliably get it. And also, it does have the defense aspect. 4,000 is nice, but we just don't often have extra Dawn left over to play. And since it's a brick the entire game, we probably would want to trash it, but then it's not searchable for the late game defense. It just doesn't work out. If you put it in your deck, it's not going to be a horrible card, but it's not good, and I don't think it's worth putting into our deck list in OP15. Then we have Kaido. Kaido trashes a 7 cost. That dodges KO effect, so it can hit a lot of the yellow things that we might want to shoot with that 7k. If you add -3, such as with Augur, you can also shoot 10 costs, which is of course a really nice thing to shoot in those matchups. Being able to clear a 10 cost Whitebeard, for example, is incredibly powerful. However, we have to trash a card from our hand to activate the effect, and that's just not worth it. We, at this point in the game where we're playing 9 and 10 costs, are down to a couple cards in hand, probably, and we can't afford to trash a 10 cost Teach, our last counter, a 5 cost Kuzan, a Black Hole. We can't afford to get rid of these. Yeah, it hurts too much for our card economy. And it's only a 9k body, right? Like, if it had at least a better body, then maybe it could follow up. But after that first effect, it's kind of useless in comparison. If you just play 10 cost Teach, you have a 12k body, right? And it blocks. And sure, it didn't get rid of the body, but it did stun it. And you have so much more of a threat. You have free blocks. It's also not searchable. It's a brick for almost the entire game. It's just outmatched by Teach. There is potential that maybe some win in the future. There's a set of card combos that make it worth to include the Kaido, but OP15 is not that set. Then there's Nightmare Luffy, the card from OP15 actually, that is the tech option. Now, Nightmare Luffy allows us to go and be a 7,000 leader during our opponent's turn if we have 20 cards or more in the trash. And that is a great potential power. If you do a bit of math and you do a bit of experimentation of how fast you get there, you find that to get to 20 cards in trash by the relevant point in time, which would be your 10 Dawn turn, your 12 Dawn turn, maybe a bit later, you need an early stage and maybe 2 my ages. Maybe a bit less if you countered a lot, or maybe a bit more if you, you know, didn't or didn't get the stage early. But that's kind of what you need to do to hit it on time. And then you have a very nice ability against whiteboards. Your opponent's one costs can't really get Dawn attached to them anymore to swing. Your opponent's normal wide board of 5k and 6k swings need to actually invest things to be a threat. And cards, swings that would usually just go through like 7 or 9k can now actually be gotten rid of. You also can't like, rest him like you could rest a blocker or something. Even if he's rested, your leader is going to stay up. And so he's nice in that sense. He also has counter, which is rare for these type of high-end strong effects. And that is another plus as to why we may want to play him. And I think that in OP15, that is a very useful effect that we can somewhat consistently get to. Last, we have Finger Pistol. Finger Pistol was the tech that we ran in OP14. Really strong card, being able to shoot 5 costs hits a lot of powerful things because there's a lot of powerful 4 and 5 costs, blockers included when you need to go for game. And so, very strong card, to a large degree due to the trigger. If you have 4 of these in your deck, you have a more than 30% chance to get one trigger off during a game. Ideally, of course, earlier on. And being able to shoot a 4 cost, a 5 cost, even stuff that is otherwise protected, like the 5 cost Tashigi, for nothing is absolutely insane and can win you the game single-handedly. So in metas where there's a lot of targets for this, absolutely great to include. It also fills your trash by 3 cards when you use it, which is a nice spike for Burgess. Again, even better as a trigger. Your Burgess is just one stage further than he would otherwise be. I think in OP15, the way to go is the Nightmare Luffy. The first two generally aren't worth it. Finger Pistol can be worth it, but in OP15, there's just fewer targets, and Luffy gets there in a much more nice manner. The whiteboards that are otherwise very difficult for us to overcome now become manageable. Against the Nell, he can't swing that high aside from the 10 cost. He usually swings for 6, even in the late game, and now that kind of messes with his whole plan. Against Lucy, the broader stuff. Against a lot of the yellow swarming, like the Sky Luffy or Kalgara, it just gets you a lot of value and is also just a decent body by itself. We get into the last part of the tech, which is the 2Ks. So, we start with Perota. Also OP15, cheap protection of Burgess, of our lower cost blockers, and of Kuzan, the 6 cost Kuzan. We have to trash a card, so it's far from free. But it is nice to finally have some way to protect our cards there. However, we need to actually play it, so we can't like hold it in hand and then use it to defend. We need to drop this card on the board, and our opponent can then just choose to not do stuff. There's not a lot of removal this meta. Red Rock is gone, although it wouldn't even help against Red Rock. There's just not a lot of things that actually shoot. The main things that do have some level of removal are power reduction like Fire Fist from Lucy, or rests like Mamaragan, and Perona doesn't help against those at all. The main removal that one would think of is Gravity Blade, and while this can be strong against Gravity Blade, I don't think it's worth including just for the matches where we have a matchup where somebody runs Gravity Blade and includes it, and finds it and has a good situation for us to hit it, right? We can't, it's not searchable, it's not going to be better than Caribou. Yeah. We have Sabo. Sabo is a 2k that becomes a 3 cost 6000 blocker later on, but late game the 3 cost is too much. The 1 cost blocker Caribou would probably have the same effect. It's an awkward effect. While it sounds cool, it's just not going to be worth it. An OP15 neither. Devon, this Blackbeard Pirates version, is just a worse, stronger, since she reduces by 1 and not by 2. Um, if you're in a meta where there's specific -1s that are very important, then it can work. And if you're considering adding more than 8 2Ks, the searchable one is of course a nice choice. Speaking of which, we have the Shiryu, one of the original 2Ks. When attacking, he can trash 2, draw 2, but generally he's just not a great 2K, which is why we replaced him with Karibu as soon as we could. He is the only 3 cost in the entire archetype though, so sometimes if you're on 3 and you have nothing else, it's better to play this than nothing at all. And it is searchable. Now, for some trash cards that are bad, they're not even tech, they're just bad. Okay, they may seem good if you don't read them very thoroughly, or if you're just blindly copy pasting. So let's go through them. Pizarro is a waste of a stage. He forces you to rest your stage to give him a 5k swing. You get less cards in trash, you get less searchers. It's a sad 5k swing. It's a waste of a card. It's ignorable. Don't play Pizarro. The Rush Burgess, 5 cost, makes you pay 6 Dawn for a 7k swing, at which point you could just attach 6 Dawn to a Lafitte. He's a brick. He's just worse than playing Burgess the turn before in every imaginable scenario. He's bait, don't play him. People's Dreams, pretty funny. It's probably gonna miss though, and doesn't even have that strong of an effect as an Asher result. Yeah, so don't do it. We don't even have the Dawn. And then lastly, almost a joke, the Shirohoshi 2K lowers our trash and costs a Dawn to go even in cards. It's horrible. Don't. Now, trash cards aside, there's also trash ideas you can do that tie a bit into what I was saying earlier with which cards to include. The first one is putting stage or 5 cost Kuzan below 4 is a trash idea. It's a horrible idea. You should never do it. Putting the 10 cost Burgess Black Hole or any of the searchers below 3, as I mentioned before, also a very bad idea. And then also, if you don't include any blocker targets for Kuzan, so no Shiryu, no Devon, no Wolf, is also going to be just stupid, and it gives you less options to play with later defensively. If you see a deck list that includes any of the top cards or follows any of the ideas that I listed below, be very, very skeptical of that list. If it won something, it was probably a 6-person local. If somebody posted it, it might just be somebody who doesn't play Blackbeard. Be careful if you notice any of these things. Finally, we get to an actual deck list. We're going to look at the deck list that you would run if we were playing a Burgess and Blockers approach in OP15. So, let's just take a look at this. We have a lot of the core, a lot of the cards that were explained before. The 2Ks, we have 4 of all the searchers, we have 3 Vivis as the blocker, 10 cost, Kuzans, all that stuff. We see here that we've added 2 of the activate main Shiryu. We don't have the general removal engine, right? So the OP10 Shiryu helps a lot versus an L and other scenarios where the engine could just use its normal things. And Nightmare Luffy is the tech card I think has the most consistent value and can actually, be a stronger tool than something like the engine. Finger Pistol has potential, but I don't think it has enough targets this time, and the times when it is good aren't as common in OP15 as they were in OP14. One thing one could do is cutting the Shiryu for Devon, the blocker Shiryu for the blocker Devon, a second blocker Devon, just because as a 5k body, Shiryu is very vulnerable to Mamaragan, and there's not a lot of great forecasts for him to target. However, because we don't have engine removal, I think that for the BnB deck list, he is worth including. Having one of each also gives you flexibility when you're choosing what to bring back with the Kuzan. That basically is what I would use as the BnB Decklist. I will link it or copy it in the description. If you want to play BnB in OP15, this is, I think, a solid place to start. There's some flexibility, but this is a good point to start from. And from there, I'm going to look a bit at the strength of the BnB in OP15. First, we can survive by clearing the board with the Burgess. Just the big swings work as protection in itself. The blockers that we have also work to protect life and Burgess, so we can kind of be flexible with them. And then the leader ability protects those smaller blockers, preventing on plays that would otherwise remove them. Having space for the tech and not having to remove some of the core means we get additional power spikes. So in this scenario, that would be having, for example, the Nightmare Luffy available as a tool, which the KO engine just does not have access to. And it has high finishing strength, and can suddenly break through even very strong defenses with a lot of counter or with blockers. Then the decklist for the KO engine in OP15. So we have cut down on some stuff. We have the 4 docks, we have the 4 augers, and we have 2 Tempest kicks as the bonus part of the engine. I don't have any 7 cost teaches here, as you can see. To make space for the stuff, the engine, we cut down 1 6 cost Kuzan and 1 10 cost Teach. The Kuzan gets kind of dealt with too easily by Barrier Pistol and Mamaragan, which is why he's not as nice, but he's still a high value card in a lot of matchups. And Teach we can generally still find consistently, even as a 3 of. The 7 cost Teach, however, for the engine is too slow. I think for stuff like Enel, even though he could shoot the dog, it's just a bit too late at that point. Doesn't have a lot of good targets with 3 or 6 costs. It's just not the right place for it. You could maybe include it as a one of, depending on the meta at your locals, but generally Tempest Kick is going to be the better choice. It has good targets. The -3, doing double -3, like with Augur and Tempest Kick into Dock, lets you kill a lot of nice things like the Sabo in Lucy, the 4-cost Cavendish, but also combining it with Black Hole means you can do stuff like shoot the 6-cost Immune Enel, or the 6-cost on KO Kuma, the 7-cost on KO Robin, the 5-cost on KO Nami. It does a lot of nice setup, and the trigger can also be very strong. So that is the KO continuation that I think is going to be best. You notice that we don't have the OP10 Shiryu in, even though we have it in the other deck list, and that's just because it's not as useful since we do have Dock. So when it comes to clearing 1 costs, it's just nicer to have Dock, and even if there's 3 costs we want to kill, we can combine the Dock with Augur or Tempest Cake. It's just not as important. And lastly, for the KO engine, I did decide to cut the PRB Shiryu for Devon. We don't need the removal as much, and the problems I mentioned with the KO and with the PRB Shiryu stand, the 5000 stat line means he's very vulnerable to Mamaragan in the Enel matchup, and also just doesn't have a lot of targets. The main 4-cost targets we would potentially even think of are stuff like the Cavendish and the Lucy matchup, but he has the Leo to protect it, and so we just don't have the right moment to play Shiryu like that. And the second Devon means we're still going to have 2 blockers to find and grab with Kuzan, and a second chance to find that cheesy double attack finish. List aside, what's it good at? So we want to set up to shoot whatever our opponent plays, right? Slow them. And then we want to transition into the late game Burgess and 10 cost teaches. We can kill problematic 1 costs that would otherwise flood the board, and otherwise just become a difficult and inefficient to remove problem. And Augur and Tempest Kick allow us to shoot very difficult targets with Black Hole much more efficiently than if we were to use Stronger, because Stronger can also kill, for example, the 6 cost Anel, but it costs us an extra card, right, compared to Tempest Kick. It also draws more cards than BnB does, just because Augur and Doc both draw a card on death, and so it has a bit more resources in that regard. Now, we looked at the deck lists and the strengths of each of those lists. So, what type of metas invite what type of lists? Which type of metas do we play BnB and which type of metas do we play the KO engine in? So, when is the engine strong? The engine is strong when there's a lot of 1 and 4 costs that we need to kill. Think of Mihawk, for example. He has a lot of stuff that the 1 cost that unrest themselves, 1 cost that go wide and will be buffed, like Rayleigh in OP12, right? Stuff that is actually worth removing. 4 costs, there's stuff like the Cavendish now, but there's a lot of things like that. And when there are targets like that, then the KO engine shines, especially if there is like point 2. No protection or protection that we can get around. If it's something like a 1 cost protector, then like we have now, then the Dock Q is actually quite nice because for very little resources we can force our opponent to pay the price that he needs to pay in case there is one for protection. And it also shines when there's high bodies that we can't really ignore or clear with swings, right? Think of the 7 cost Shanks that Mihawk has. 9,000 body, minus 1,000 aura, swinging into it, especially through events, is basically impossible. But we also can't ignore it because it's just too strong. And the engine can kill it. Augur, Augur, Dock Q, gone. Augur Finger Pistol, gone. Augur Black Hole, gone. And so it allows us to deal with things that raw swings aren't able to. When is the engine weak? So kind of intuitively, they're opposites of what we had before. So key targets that are at costs like 2 and 5 are difficult for us to kill with the engine. We would need to invest more resources than is worth it to kill something like a 5 cost, like having to set up 2 augurs and a Dock Q to shoot a 5 cost is too slow and doesn't feel good. When there's protection we just cannot get around, like Emu as just immunity, the only way to kill it is Black Hole. The engine just does nothing in those matchups. And there are high bodies that we can't ignore. Slight mistype. When is Burgess and Blocker strong though? So there is no good removal for him. That is always a great scenario. If your opponent doesn't have a good non-KO effects, to get rid of the Burgess is a point when he shines, because he just, especially once there's multiple on board, is such a massive threat that if he's not able to be removed with events or effects, he is going to beat everything down. When the meta is high bodies, he's also in an advantageous position because we can get to those higher numbers for weight cheaper. Think of something like Ace, we can beat into the actual 6k leader because we have those high things, right? And the high body meta generally means a slower meta where he has time to ramp up and swing into everything. When the engine is weak, of course, kind of like in a back and forth sense, BnB will be best. And lastly, when there is very strong tech that is important in matchups that are either common or multiple matchups that have it, that the engine just doesn't have space for, right? Because say, for example, Finger Pistol is incredibly important for multiple matchups and super strong, and the trigger wins you games that are otherwise unwinnable, then you want to include it. But if the engine would want to include it, they would have to start cutting into very important cards, like putting Teach to 2 or cutting down on the searchers. And that is when BnB is stronger. When is BnB weak? So first, when there is easy removal for him present. A great example of this is the 8 cost Rush Luffy that blue-purple was playing, it can bounce a 4-cost back to hand when attacking, basically for free, which means that at no effort whatsoever, once per turn, out of nowhere, they were able to bounce our Burgess back to hand, and Burgess was basically useless. And it forced us to completely give up on Burgess and blockers during that where Blue Purple Luffy was so dominant. There's a lot of one cost aggro and general aggro stuff like that. He can be too slow, and the engine would just have a much better time. And then when there are very important enemy cards that we need to kill, but that we can't really kill well with swings, either because they are protected by good blockers that are cheap, or they are protected by our opponent having a shit ton of counter. If we need to deal with the enemy board, but swings can't do it, then BnB kind of fails in comparison to the shooting that can get around those counters and blockers. Of course, that brings us to the question, well, what is the current meta? Which do we actually go with? So I color coded here a bit just for how heavily favored a matchup is in the direction of Engine or BnB. So white means it doesn't really matter which one you're playing with against the deck. Slightly green versus dark green is that the engine is a bit better than BnB, or that the engine is a lot better than BnB in that matchup. And then light blue and dark blue for when BnB is a bit or a lot better than the KO engine in that matchup. So I'm going to go by the popularity of the decks being played. From a couple days ago, pretty big sample size. So while this will shift a bit, this is a pretty big and strong sample size to base things off of. So most played game is Lucy. 15% of total games were Lucy, followed by Nell with 11%, Nami at 9%, Ace at 8%, and the OP15 Luffy at 5%. We can see here that the engine is a bit better against Lucy. He has a lot of one cost that we can shoot efficiently with Doc. He also has Cavendish, who is a core of his win condition, and Augur Doc can shoot him effectively. And Doc can also get rid of Leo so that Black Hole can shoot the Cavendish. If he doesn't have the Cavendish, he doesn't really have much of a chance. And Double Augur and Doc actually also shoots the 7 cost. Augur Black Hole also shoots the 7 cost. And so we're able to deal with his stuff pretty well. We're favored in both scenarios, but Engine just has a slight edge. Then there's Nell, where the engine is much, much better. He relies on one cost that swing for 6k, and maybe even get stuff like double attack, and Doc Q is a perfect answer that prevents them from swinging, while also forcing our opponent to waste a swing into the Doc and draws a card. Really nice and effective. And then Augur allows us to more effectively bring the 6 cost Nells into Black Hole range, which is also nice. And the Burgesses don't have much of an advantage because the small things we can swing into, anything can, like 2k bodies we can manage, but the higher stuff like the Enel, the 10ks are too big for Burgess to swing into, so there's no comfortable spot for him. Nami, it doesn't really matter. Both sides have little advantages. Burgess has those bit more swings early on, later on, more Burgesses because he didn't play removal, but the engine is able to get rid of some of those bodies that are otherwise not really killable. Augur shooting a Black Hole for the Robin and Kuzan is nice and effective. Yeah, so both work. We're favored into both. Ace, BnB is a bit better. The tech doesn't really help, but like the extra VVs can be nice, just as a smaller blocker. Engine can do things here or there, but BnB is a bit better. And then Sky Luffy, obviously, is just going to be favored for BnB, just because we can't remove his board at all, and so we're racing him for life. And the blockers and the focus on Burgess, which we can of course also do with the other deck, but the ability to play the smaller blockers and Nightmare Luffy in this scenario is stronger and is a point for BnB. Now, for the rest, I'm not going to go into as much detail, just kind of going to glance over it a bit. Crocodile doesn't matter. Mihawk is better for the engine due to some of the stuff I explained earlier. Boa is nicer for BnB, just because we can't really shoot things effectively. Roger doesn't matter for the teach matchup. Funny mirror matchup. Doc can shoot the one cost, which is annoying. BnB is of course the goal, but there's not really much additional things you have. Both people will be playing for the Burgesses, so unless the engine person cut down on Burgesses or black holes, it'll be roughly even. Moria is nicer for the engine, doesn't matter for yellow Bonnie. BnB has a bit better of a time against purple Dofi. Calgary doesn't matter. Red-green Luffy is a bit nicer for the engine because you can't really swing into anything against red-green Luffy early on. And so the engine can actually remove stuff. Then Zoro, we're now at like 2% of total games, right? So these aren't as common anymore. Zoro is nicer for BnB, as is NL, just a little bit. The black yellow Luffy, it doesn't matter. Brook, it doesn't matter. We just crush both of those decks, and the perspective here doesn't change. Emu is of course a lot nicer for BnB because the engine is useless, and the extra cards we get in BnB for it, like the blockers or maybe now the Nightmare Luffy, actually have use. And then towards the lower stuff, for Kobe doesn't matter, for Egghead Luffy doesn't matter, Red Blue Salvo is a bit BnB, Blue Purple Luffy is nicer towards the engine, and lastly Rosinante is a bit nicer for BnB since we can't shoot things. So where does that actually put us? What do we go for? So let's go, finally. Comparing the two, first let's look at the group 1, which is the engine favorite matchups. We have Lucy, Purple Nell, Mihawk, Moria, Red Green Luffy, and Blue Purple Luffy. The lower ones, of course, lower percentages, but what does stand out is that we have Lucy and Purple Nell as the two most common decks, and these add up to 36% of the total, games played. Then we have the second group, which are those where BnB is favored. We see here Red Blue Ace, for example, but also Sky Luffy is nice, and these add up to 29.59%. Still pretty big, but a bit smaller than Group 1. And then the biggest group is Group 3, where basically it doesn't really matter much. We have Nami and Crocodile here. They add up to 34%, so almost as much as Group 1. And when weighing these, aside from the total percentages, it's important to notice that NL is heavily engine favored, and it is going to be the second or the most common deck, especially in a competitive setting. The top two decks that are being played the most and the top two strongest decks are both matchups where the engine is favored, and NL specifically is heavily favored for the engine. So we're much better off playing the engine in those scenarios. Of the top 4, only one of them is BnB favored and only slightly being favored. The Red Blue Ace is nicer as BnB, but not by a huge margin. And then it is relevant to note that for a lot of them it's pretty neutral, right? So in conclusion, we're gonna go with the KO engine in OP15. I greatly enjoyed BnB in OP14, and it was the right play to make, but with both Lucy and Enel being a lot nicer to play if you're playing the engine, especially Enel, it is the way to go. Since they're the two decks, the ratio of how many of them will be even higher if you're in a more competitive setting. So if you're trying to go to a regional or a treasure cup or higher online ladder, then you're going to see even more of those, and the engine advantage will be even bigger, and the ratios will skew towards those decks. BnB still works, especially if the people in your locals, which is what most people are going to be playing, are not playing these leaders, then it is a solid choice. It is a little bit, up to taste, but with Teach, it's generally important to adapt It's tough to switch over if you've been playing one version for a while and you enjoy just beating things in with Burgess and the engine just seems difficult or confusing, or the other way around when people in OP14 and 13 should have switched to BnB, but we're just stuck on the engine and we're just playing worse lists as a result. It can be tough to switch over between the two, but that's part of becoming a good Blackbeard player. Adjusting to the meta and being able to play both the KO engine teach and the Burgess and blockers teach. Because I don't doubt that which is the better way to go will bounce back and forth in upcoming sets as it has in previous sets. And so it's just important to learn both, even if both are relatively strong, and if you do play a Burgess and blockers variant, it will still be okay. So, thanks for watching. Um, yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. This video, alongside some of the other guides, takes a lot of effort. I don't know how many hours I put into this. The research, the playing, the script, the PowerPoint, the organizing, the graphics and setup, even just the goddamn math. It takes a lot, so consider subscribing, joining the Discord, etc. Or even, listed below, coaching. If you want to go a bit higher with Teach, coaching is available. Just write me on Discord. So, thank you for watching the video. Thank you for taking the time to do it. And I will see you on Discord or in the next video.